Welcome to Behind the Lash Chair. I'm your host, Alexis Weisenburger, founder and owner of AW Lashes. My goal is to help you as a lash artist grow with tips and tricks on lashing, becoming an entrepreneur, marketing, and so much more. This is an amazing place to find free resources and connect with lash artists all around the world. Let's get started. Welcome back, you guys, for another amazing podcast. We are doing a part 2 this week on what we talked about 2 weeks ago, which was, Ty and I's whole journey of how we started AW Lashes. But I just, before we get into the podcast, wanted to do a quick reminder that we don't run ads on the show, because I know what that's like being a lash artist, to be mid-lashing and hear a podcast on ice cream or something so not relevant on what we're talking about. So instead of running ads, how you support the show is just by sharing it. So we appreciate you guys sharing it to all your lash friends and the community around you. And thank you so much for your support. So let's get started.
All right, I'm going to jump in, and I just have to say, yeah, because especially when an ad comes on for ice cream and you're lashing and there's nothing you can do about that, that's an issue. So, anyway, for those of you who didn't listen to part 1 of the podcast, please go back and listen to it. We're going to jump in. I'll do a quick little recap here for those of you who did listen, since it was probably a couple of weeks ago that you've initially listened. But Alexis and Ty, we're with Alexis and Ty again, and they talked to us about how they got married, how they started saving, and their journey through Alexis being a lash artist, clear through to opening her first, kind of individual space in Parker, Colorado, and getting to the point where she was outgrowing her space. So Alexis, kind of recap us and let us know where you were at in Parker. I know you had some other people working with you and you were realizing your space was too small.
Yeah, so that's exactly what was going on. The space was too small. I had 2 girls working for me. It was going really well. They wanted to work more days. And where we left off, we just talked to my father-in-law. He made us sit down and, do some numbers and start looking at spaces. So we kind of had that all mapped out, and we were transitioning to okay, it's time to get a bigger space.
So here's my first question for you. As you were realizing you needed to get a bigger space, how did you decide where to go? Because I think a lot of people would think, and I know that Parker, where your original space was and where you moved to Centennial, are quite close, but they're still not next door. How did you decide, and what went into your decision to move to Centennial, and how you decided that area?
Yeah, well, welcome, Ty.
Hello, everyone. I'm back.
So actually, it was kind of more Ty that was very good at doing broad searches, because I was kind of like, we got to, find something close. The clients aren't willing to travel. And it was Ty that kind of would go around and find empty spaces, and then you'd FaceTime me.
Yeah, so basically, to answer the question directly, there wasn't a specific area I was looking for. It was more of like a radius about 10 to 15 miles from the Parker location. I wasn't so much worried about it being in the same city as much as I was worried about it being a good deal. So I browsed the internet a little bit. There's a site called LoopNet that you can use. There's hundreds of others, I'm sure, but they basically have renter options for buildings. They have buyers options, and I didn't really go through a broker at this point yet. I was just kind of browsing myself, and then I started to just take drives through different commercial neighborhoods with commercial spaces, and started to notice when I would drive past certain shopping centers, I'd notice the signs. Most shopping centers, especially now, back then maybe not so much, but now since COVID, most all of them have, the real estate group. Like ours happen to be Legend Real Estate. There's other, groups obviously in every different state but there's a big sign outside of every shopping center, and it usually will say space available. It'll sometimes even say, 5,000 square foot space, which is massive. But like, these signs, I kind of looked for them, and then I was like, ooh, this one says there's 1,000 square foot space, and then dash 5,000 square foot space, which basically told me that this shopping center had a couple of different options. So I drive into the shopping center and I park my car, get out and kind of walk the shopping center. And usually on the door of the empty, space within that shopping center, they had the sign, and I'd kind of peek in, and then we'd kind of do this for about 4 or 5 of them. And we would just call the number on the outside, super easy. You'd call the person and we were like, hey, this is what we're interested in, this space. Tell me a little bit more about it. Can we come look at it? And then we just set up, to come look at it, and Alexis would come with me.
I think just something to mention when you're looking for a space is kind of, Christine, you can vouch for this, is like what you're also looking for is like, are you looking for walk-in business? Because that's something Ty and I had to discuss, was like, are we expecting, when we open up a salon, for us to get a bunch of walk-ins, or are we really going to focus on marketing online to get new customers?
Yeah, we actually ended up deciding on a space that was not conducive to walk-ins. It was in the back of a shopping center behind Avasa Fitness, and it, there was rarely people walking along that shopping center. Cars could not drive by and see our sign outside the, up on top of the space, the unit there. And so we were relying heavily on Google for that marketing, but we decided that this space was the best price at the time, and the benefits outweighed the disadvantages of having, less walk-in traffic. So that's kind of what we decided, but definitely something to think about. And then another thing to think about is, when you are getting into that space, who's around you? So our units around us were actually pretty empty, and that was kind of the downside of this space. Now, 3 years later, it's actually grown, and there's a salon next to us, like a hair salon. There's a nail shop. There's a injection place. So that kind of helped feed. There's a dental office. Woohoo, go dentists, right across from us. So like that fed into, maybe some walk through traffic now, but at first it was pretty much none. So you got to kind of think about where it's located, who's driving by, and on those little brochures that they give you that you can find, or once you call that broker for the real estate company, they'll tell you, and they'll give you a brochure that says how much drive-by traffic you have, how many people pass there a day, like all the stats and numbers that boost their selling point for that shopping center to be a renter, basically.
Well, and I think that's a super valid point, though, that you have to make that decision, and it is a conscious decision, whether you're going to look for the walk-in traffic or whether you're going to have to spend a little more in advertising. I also think it's important what you mentioned initially, Ty, with the 15-minute radius. Thinking about that, most people opening a salon, I would hope, already have a pretty full clientele. And so they're at a point where opening a salon is a really good option, and so looking at your current customers, maybe even analyzing what cities they're in. And I'm assuming also in those brochures, correct me if I'm wrong, but in those brochures, it probably talks about the surrounding neighborhoods as well.
Yes, 100%, and the median income.
Yeah.
And all those types of things that you want. I mean, you want to be in an area that's probably more on the affluent side. Absolutely. Because the service that you're providing is typically not a necessity. Maybe it is for some, of course, but for most, it's kind of it's not a
luxury
necessity. Yeah, it's a luxury service. Thank you. Yeah.
So definitely looking at the surrounding neighborhoods, looking at the radius for your clients and that drive-in, and then realizing and analyzing that space for knowing what you're going to have to be in for. Are you going to be advertising, or are you going to get walk by traffic? And for those places with walk by, yeah, you're going to pay a premium in the space. So you have to decide where you're going to spend your money. I also think it's important, and I'm sure you can get into this, Alexis, and a little bit more, Ty, like as you're talking about how with your space and those kinds of things in your negotiation with your agent, but also understanding what kind of a space you need. Because Alexis, you were looking at some place primarily for lashes, but it depends on what services you're going to provide. And I think that's something that people need to think about, because I think a lot of people in this industry, especially because when you get into lashes, you have to either have an esthetician or a cosmetology license. And so there's lots of services you can provide. And I think you need to really think hard about what kind of services you want to provide, because that will also dictate what kind of spaces you can go into, whether you need plumbing and all of the extra things you need.
Yeah, I do remember when we were looking at spaces, it was kind of, we didn't really realize this until we were kind of into a few places and looking at them and being like, oh, which one should we sign? That we started thinking of like, oh, maybe we need plumbing, because they're not just like me, where I do lashes all day, every day. I don't add any surface. I don't even wax brows. Like, I literally just do lash extensions. I don't even do lash perms. Like, I just do lash extensions. So ideally, when I was first going in, I was like, oh, everyone's just like me. And then realizing, you're totally right, Christine, like there's cosmetologists and estheticians that do hair and lashes, or do skin and lashes. So, mentioning that, we actually, looked at a few spaces, and it's really hard to find plumbing. And going back to like, we had to hire a real estate person because Ty was doing pretty much all the work himself. And so we decided, well, maybe we'll hire a real estate person. And
well, you don't really hire them. You basically, so at this point, the broker, the real estate company, so in this case it was Legend Real Estate, they had their brokers that were basically acting as the salespeople, right, for selling the space or selling the renter space. And then when we met with them to kind of look at the space, we were kind of like, okay, like, are you our broker? And they're like, well, we can be, but you have the option to find your own, or just, negotiate by yourself. And so we tried it on our own just to save money. And then we realized, this broker from Legend is kind of on the side of the owner who owns the shopping center. So they're probably biased. So let's get our own third party broker. And so basically we just found one randomly online. We looked up real estate brokers. Actually, we may have gotten a referral from our accountant, actually, but you can just look up a random real estate broker.
Read the reviews
and see how they are. And so the way that it works is we don't really pay them. We basically say, hey, look, we're looking at this space. Also, they can look at other spaces too. You don't pay them a dime for that process. The way they get paid is a percentage on the sign. So when we sign the lease, they get a percentage of what we basically pay on that lease. So they take out of that final cut, which, is definitely nice that you don't have to pay out of pocket for their services, but, on the back end it is. So we ended up going with our own. I don't know if we would have done that looking back. It wasn't like that substantially that much greater. We may have just not had that aggressive of a real estate guy.
Yeah, because I remember sometimes we would ask them for something like, hey, can you add this to it? Or,
when we were negotiating the contract, he kind of helped us look for things in the 50-page contract of what are red flags, what are things we want to ask for in the space, like tenant improvement, which is basically like them paying for, new flooring and new walls and building rooms and plumbing, for example. And so those are all things that this real estate broker kind of would help us negotiate in that deal, and things that he would think about that we weren't really thinking about necessarily. And then he would go back and forth with the Legend real estate broker and kind of make that agreement based on what we wanted and what the owner would concede on. So that was kind of a back and forth that I don't know if it was the best way. It was one way to do it. Another way, you could get a lawyer involved who would kind of help you. Like, so some lawyers are focused in on real estate and they can kind of guide you in that process.
But yeah, that was something we did though, was try to maybe negotiate plumbing. And it finally came down to, they would not negotiate on plumbing because it was so expensive. So we had one sink because we had a bathroom, and I was like, you know what, if someone wants to rent from us, they're just going to have to be okay going into the restroom. And, if they want to do facials, like putting their towels in there and using the sink for filling up bowls and bringing it back to the room and things like that, because plumbing was just way too expensive. And it was really hard to find a space if it wasn't a pre-owned salon that had plumbing. So just know right off the bat, if you're looking for a place that has plumbing or you want to put plumbing, at least you're looking at 10 to 20 grand.
So here's a great place to jump in. Because I know you guys did a lot of it on your own. And as you were negotiating those tenant improvements, like you were talking about, like the flooring and the paint and all of those kinds of things, what lessons did you learn in that process? And if there's anything you could have done differently in retrospect and in hindsight, what would you do differently to kind of advise people who might be, getting ready to do this and they're looking for maybe, a real estate agent, which, by the way, like if you've ever bought a home before, it's very similar. They make their cut, when the house is sold, they get a percentage. And so, and the difference, and I'm sorry, I'm like jumping around, but I was thinking about this as you guys were talking. A lawyer, those are going to be fees you're going to pay up front. The real estate, they're going to take it on the back end. But what are some lessons you learned in negotiating that contract and specifically in the tenant improvements?
I think for me, I didn't realize how long these negotiations would take. I'm kind of more of like, let's go, let's get the, ball rolling. Like, let's do this in a week. So like when we first got into it, I thought, and my clients would always ask me like, oh, you're getting a salon. Like, when are we going to go there? And I'm like, oh, probably in a few weeks. No problem. And I think just alone going back and forth with negotiation took about a month.
No, more than that, probably 2 to 3.
Yeah.
It wasn't until we actually got on the phone with the actual landlord who owned, he probably didn't own it, but like he was directly working for the group that owned the shopping center. So
yeah, so know that it's going to take time.
Yeah.
Because I thought we'd be in a month, we'd be going, maybe 2 months max, it would be open, sign on the door. So knowing the time.
I would say for me, it was getting help earlier from an expert like an attorney on the document. So the document we got was like 50 pages of just
it feels like a different language
that I would have to look up words and see what they're talking about, and I had no idea if they're ripping us off or if, most of them benefit the landlord anyway. And so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't getting, or we weren't getting ripped off. And so I think getting a lawyer and paying for one sooner would have been much better. We kind of messed around a little longer by getting like my dad involved to read it. And even he was like, I don't know what this is saying. And, he's worked in business for a long time. So I think just getting help sooner, trying to do maybe delegating it more may have helped a lot.
But we were trying to understand it, which I still recommend doing, because, if I died, they'd go after Ty, or, just things like that are hidden in there that you don't realize, or what they won't and will cover is kind of something too. Like if the plumbing goes out, for example, a year later, we had plumbing issues. It was like corroded pipes, but they wanted to blame us for it because it was in our unit, but it was the whole complex. So we had to kind of go through the document, and I'm glad we read it, and they were trying to say it was in our unit, but then we were like, no, we know it's, everywhere. So we could kind of negotiate that, and because we understood the contract.
I think just being aware of all those little nuances, because
Roof
for
leaks.
example, the neighbor next door to us had a rock thrown through their front window at one point, and that was technically in their contract labeled as the assignee, is what they call us, at their responsibility. And so there was no payment for a new door, a new window by the landlord. So it's little things like that were nice to kind of,
and that's a few $1,000s
understand.
actually, because it's a big window, big door. So all those fun things you have to learn, and you learn them on the way, but you also, I don't know, it's crazy. And I think if up front you were to just like try to do everything all at once, you'd feel overwhelmed, versus just like little by little trying to understand, and understanding there's going to be so many things down the road that will come up.
Yeah. I think one other thing to answer your question, Christine, of what we would have done differently, I think initially we were going back and forth between this space, which was about 1,400 square feet, and a space that was about 2,400 square foot. And the 2,200 square foot space was better visibility to the road and to the complex. It wasn't in the back. It had a bigger front area with windows, and it would just popped in the center, versus our space, which was a little smaller, obviously, and the outside was smaller. And it had plumbing because it was an old hair salon. It was bigger, more expensive, but looking back, I think it would have been nice to take a little bit bigger of a risk. Obviously, that's easier to say now that, we didn't take the risk, and maybe it would have been different. But we did feel like once we got into that smaller space, we kind of grew out of it again pretty quickly. And I credit that to Alexis just being a go-getter and her personality. And so, if we were to go back and I would have done it again, I probably would have taken that initial risk, seeing how successful the salon was in just the 3 years. The other thing I want to mention too is that when you sign a 5-year or a 10-year lease, your cost is a lot less, and you lock yourself in for less, price per square foot and triple net pricing. So what we did is we kind of took the more conservative route, less risky, 3 years with a smaller space. And that was just based on our situation with me in dental school, and we didn't know where I would end up working. But looking back and seeing where we are now, I think I would have, if you're going to be in a space or live in an area and you're not going to really move and you're in it for the long haul, then I'd say jump into that 5 or 10-year space to get that lower price. And, you have a little bit more room to grow over those 5 to 10 years.
I'm in shock hearing all this, everyone. This is like my first time him admitting that I was right. I mean, wow. Can we pause and just take a moment here?
Well, we are recording this conversation, and this will be saved
this is documented. Well, see,
it is.
So I was kind of the one, me and my dad both were the conservative ones, and told Alexis, no, let's keep the small space and take the less risky route. And Alexis was like, no, let's go big or go home. And we were like, no, calm down. You're coming from literally a 200 square foot room, and you're now jumping to a 2,200 square foot, old salon. Like, this is big. But yeah, I think, sometimes the risk is more fun, and you get bigger rewards when you take bigger risks.
Okay, so you used a term in there I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, and just go into your negotiations a little bit more. Be triple net.
Oh, yeah.
So there's 3 different numbers that you evaluate in your lease agreement. You have your base rent, how much you're paying for the space every month, okay? And then on top of that, you have your triple net, which is basically, you'll see it on an agreement as 3 ends. And those costs are basically a percentage. So it's usually between 4 and 8% that you're paying of your overall cost of base rent. So they add that on as a price for all the extra stuff, like the maintenance in the space and the
painting sidewalks.
Well, no, that's different. So painting sidewalks and your shopping center improvements, gardening for the space, the lawn mowing, the snow removal. If you live in a state like Colorado, all of those things, those are different than triple net. Those are CAM, which stands for wow, now I'm forgetting as we're talking here. I think it stands for like center something management or whatever. Basically, it means that whatever the maintenance is for the center, everyone in the center that's renting contributes to that payment. So that's CAM, base, and then triple net is kind of just the extra add-on services for that unit that can fall between like 4 and 6% of the base rent.
So when you go in and they say, oh, it's $10 a square foot, and
they multiply that $10 a square foot times whatever your square footage is,
and say it's 10 by 10, so it's $100, and then they add in all these other fees though, like you were talking about.
Yeah. So
you think it's only $100, but then when you get your check or your bill at the end of the month,
they add on the triple net and then they add on the CAM. And within the CAM cost, there's also the real estate tax. There's one other tax. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but there's these different tax values that you get on your statement. So all in all, to say, make sure you're kind of understanding what these charges are, these percentages, and
you can even ask them the averages of these, as well as I just discovered it this last year, and Ty's like, oh, they've been doing this the whole time, but as inflation has gone up, things cost more money. So somewhere in that 50-page contract that we signed, if things cost more, they can bill you in addition to that 6 or 7% that you did, initially sign, because for them that cost went up. So we got a bill for like $2,000 or $3,000 a few months ago, and they're like, yeah, this is because the maintenance on the outside is more expensive now. So that 6 to 7% that you signed off on is what the 6 and 7% difference is, because everything has gone up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So let me just go back. I just reminded myself, I just looked at the contract. So triple net includes the CAM, CAM, and it does stand for common area maintenance. So that's part of triple net. So it's basically like a subcategory within triple net. And then property tax and property insurance are the other two things that are included in triple net. So like Alexis said, those have gone up throughout the 3 years. They can't surpass a certain amount, but just know that they will list out in the contract, if it's 3, 5, or 10 years, they'll say, this is the percent we're estimating that it'll go up each year. And that's an estimation based on inflation and how, things go in the economy over time.
So
and
the last year was so
higher.
Much. It was so,
yeah,
it
last year was
insane. They billed us extra.
Yeah. And also our shopping center did a lot of improvements. They revamped a lot. Like I said, when we started, they were pretty empty and we got it at a nice low price, but they started to fill it in with the dental office, the injector, the salon, the nail salon, a dog grooming place. And so they kind of started to get bigger as a shopping center and expand, which was good for us, but also it costs a little bit more for us and also the other tenants in there.
Yeah. So I noticed they were like planting a lot more flowers and repainting things. And even my clients mentioned like, wow, they're really trying to like turn this place around. But in my mind, I'm like, oh, I don't want to get this next bill, because they're out there. They don't ask you your consent of like, hey, is this okay? We, make it look nicer. And you're like, well, if you could do it on a budget, but they don't, they don't consider you in that decision.
Yeah. One thing I want to also mention that we were talking about earlier is TI, or tenant improvement. So that's one thing we kind of just blew by, but I want to just mention that because if you get a space like ours was super old, it was some old, like, I think it was like a space that sold clothes.
The walls were yellow.
The walls were yellow.
And blue.
There was a bunch of random shelves and cabinets that were kind of old and broken, and the floor was like wood, but it was kind of moldy a little bit. It was kind of gross, to be honest, but it's okay because we asked for tenant improvement, which basically they had a standard mark for their shopping center where it was 10%, it was $10 per square foot. So that was non-negotiable, unfortunately, for them, but some shopping centers might have a little bit more negotiation. And when they say non-negotiable, that does not mean it's not negotiable. It's always negotiable. So we tried, but they
wanted us to sign more years, though.
Remember? Right. True. They said they would raise that dollar per square foot in tenant improvement if we had signed for 5 or 10 to lock us in. So we decided on the 10 for 3 years. So that was $14,000. So just to give you an idea, to take an old space, put new flooring, get the walls painted, demolition, lights, some stuff, put in lights, electrical bills, new ceiling tiles, building one extra room with walls. That all came out to about $25,000. So 14 of it, the landlord paid for. And then the other, 11,000 we put in just from our own pockets. So, or it could be a loan if you don't have $11,000 just hanging out, or a combination of both. Right.
And the landlord does not just write you a check for that. You actually get that several months later. So just keep in mind that you kind of need, that $25,000 up front, because at the end of your build out, that's when you submit all your receipts and take pictures and send it to them. And then they pay you back a few months later of what they promised they would pay you. Some people think, oh, I'm going to go into this space and I get, $20,000 to remodel. No problem. They're going to give it to me, but
write a check and then you
just go spend it. But no, they're really picky too of what you remodel.
You itemize. Well, they're not necessarily picky of what you remodel, except for like your signage on the outside. They're picky on like sending the itemized list of what we spent and what we paid for that totals the $14,000. So we were able to save some money. Here's kind of just a little tip by just having good contacts. For example, my dad does some construction work, or has in the past, and had a little bit of experience. He also has some tools that we used, a saw, and he had, no electrical experience, but like just kind of the traditional, in his garage had some of the stuff that we needed to cut wood and hang ceiling tiles and cut some of the floor tiles to fit the space, things like that. And then we hired a maintenance guy who was not a contractor per se. Some of those bigger contractor, brand named contractors are pretty expensive. We got quoted like $40,000 to use a contractor, but we kind of used a guy that was, I don't want to say like not an official contractor, because he did do maintenance work, but he was on the cheaper end because he didn't work for a big firm. He was his own little business. We just found him because he was a maintenance guy for our house, fixed up odds and ends things. So we saved some money there, and then we saved some money by having some of the equipment that my dad had. So we were definitely blessed and had the benefit of that. So if you don't have that privilege of having those contacts, that's okay. Just know that you ask around, find your network,
and also ask if you can maybe help the contractor, because that could save you some labor fees and stuff. Like one thing I know we tried to do is like keep the people that could do the labor at the site, and we'd be like, okay, you need to go to Home Depot. What do you need? Like we would go do the errands.
Alexis made Home Depot trips and made the contracted workers, they were contracted workers. They weren't contractors. But they stayed and painted the walls while Alexis went and got more paint, keep them working versus doing trips to Home Depot. And so you're right. We did kind of help and guide them so that it would take less time, and we would have to ultimately pay less for that service. If you wanted to be totally hands off, just know you can pay a contractor. He will hire all the electrician, the floor guy, the the painter. Like, he'll take care, him or her, whoever it is, will take care of that as a contractor, but you're paying a little bit more. So if you want the hands-off experience, totally available. If you want to kind of be more involved and pay a little less, that's the route we chose.
Great. I mean, because I know there are people, and Alexis and I have had this conversation. We know of someone who paid like $200,000 to renovate their space. And, when you're just starting out with a new business, that's a lot of money to be carrying, and the stress and the burden of that. We know other people who are underwater and just struggling because sometimes with the economy the way it's been, they're struggling to find booth renters or even commissioned artists and things like that. So definitely, my personality, and obviously you guys are the same, is to do as much as you can on your own or work contacts that you have to reduce your expenses so that when your salon starts making money, you can start turning a profit as quickly as possible.
Totally.
I want to shout out to the men out there who support their lash artist women, or vice versa. If you can and have the capability, help out your significant other, because I don't think we could have done it. Either of us could have done it alone. It was really nice to have two people helping, and then having just more hands, the better. So.
Absolutely. Okay. So you negotiated your space, you got in there, you negotiated your tenant improvements. You did have to put a little bit of your own money into it to finish the improvements that you needed to make, because primarily you guys did paint, flooring, and that's where you spent the bulk of your budget, as I'm remembering. And then Alexis, I know we talked about this too, is that instead of spending huge amounts doing massive renovations, you maybe went with flooring that looked good, but maybe was a little bit cheaper, and then tried to find the best deals on, some cool light fixtures or things like that would upgrade the space look without adding a lot of cost. What else? Is there anything else that you did specifically that helped you keep the cost down so that you could start turning a profit more quickly in the renovations and in that process?
I just want to say IKEA and Amazon were our best friends.
He built a lot of things.
Oh my goodness.
And a lot of things backwards.
Props to you, Ty.
IKEA is cheap. IKEA is cheap and workable. The stuff obviously is not the highest of quality. I love IKEA, don't get me wrong, but things break and things, start to wear down, which is, understandable. But if you put in the work just building the IKEA shelves, and mainly it was the dressers and the shelves that we used at IKEA and the tables.
But I do want to mention that, yes, would I have ever upgraded if I had the upfront cost? No, because I just want to mention, and this could just be like what Ty and I experienced, but you have to remember that someone's renting your space and your stuff. So they're not going to treat it as nice as you treat it. So there's going to be lash glue on it. There's going to be, dye on it and things like that. So, I know you probably, like, a lot of women, like, just picture this, like, all glass, beautiful studio where, the nice expensive drawers. But just remember, like, if you were used to your own, your space, your stuff, you treated it way better. Now having someone come in, they don't really care as much for your stuff. So I remember, like, our flooring has glue all over it.
Glue stains.
And it kind of breaks my heart because I know, like, I mean, it's not the nicest flooring, but I'm like, wow, it's nice. It is nice to me. And there's no way that glue's ever coming out.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's just everyone. I think it just is wear and tear because they're working there all day, every day even Alexis's space has wear and tear. So I wouldn't say it's the lash artist necessarily. It's just the wear and tear. And so having things that are a little less expensive that you can just throw out after a couple of years and just replace pretty easily is nice. And it was helpful. So we have, but then we have things that haven't needed to be replaced, like the mirrors and the little small shelves and the rugs, not the carpet, the rugs, and then the little furniture, the front desk apparatus has lasted this whole time. It looks great. A little stool behind the front desk, the curtains that we put in between the chairs. Those are all things that we haven't had to like replace at all, which they've lasted, which is awesome.
Yeah. And I'd say Ty did a good job there's like fees involved with opening up your space of like with the city. So you work out all these months and months getting your space through just the owners and things like that. And once you get that signed, you now have to go to the city to get your space approved through them. So Ty went and did that himself because you can hire someone to go and do that, but you have to go to the city and the fire department.
So yeah, your fire department to check and make sure everything's safe through there with sprinklers, fire extinguisher, exit signs, and every room has a vent, has a sprinkler, all those types of things, especially if you're building out and creating rooms and changing the space. We only changed one room, so it wasn't as complicated, but we had to go through the city first, and the city said, hey, go to the fire department, get them to approve, sign off on a paper, then take it over to the city office building and wait in that line, kind of like a DMV. Not as bad, but still bad. And talk to that city. And so you kind of got to know the regulations of the city, which you can typically find online these days, which is nice. And then you get them to approve the space after the fire department's approved.
And they come to your space.
They approve. Yeah. The city comes to your space as well and approves it. So you kind of set up those times. So think about this as you're starting, think about the time frame. Like you're going to need months and months and months to get this all established. It's not going to, like Alexis alluded to earlier, it's not going to just happen within a couple of weeks because people are booked out and you have to schedule it. And, all of these things are kind of considering factors.
And one thing I want to bring up here really quick that I know, and then, and we'll wrap things up for this episode. And we're definitely going to have to do a third part to this because I think all of this information is so important to people who are contemplating opening a salon, because I know this may seem scary to people who are getting ready, who are thinking about opening a salon, but having all this information and learning from your experience it's worth so much. But one thing I wanted to mention, and I know this is something that you kept in mind, Alexis, as you were looking at spaces and negotiating contracts and everything else, and looking at how much space you had, one of the things that you kept in the back of your mind was profitability, in terms of you decided you were going to set up a booth rental system versus commission, and that you wanted to work with being able to cover all of those expenses that Ty went over, the monthly fees, everything, the rent, all of those kinds of things, by only having 50% occupancy. And I think that is really key. That's another thing that people need to be thinking about, is understanding, okay, I'm going to do a commission or a booth rental, and understanding what they're going to need as they're negotiating these contracts, what they're going to need ahead of time to be able to make those payments every month and still have some money to actually put food on their table.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on that, Christine. So the biggest thing for Alexis was the fact that she worked in the salon, and the salon was basically paying for itself with the booth renters, for us at least, meant that Alexis was not paying rent to work there. And so everything that she made from her clients was profit. Okay. So that means if you're currently a a lash artist and you're renting a space, let's say you're paying $800 or $1,000 to rent a space, that's your overhead for the month. And then if you bring in $5,000 of revenue from your clients through that month, then you're taking home $4,000. Whereas if Alexis, she doesn't have to pay that $1,000 in rent because her rent is taken care of by the other booth renters, she profits and takes home $5,000. Those are not exact numbers. I'm just giving you an example of what it can give you as an owner versus as a renter. And I also want to make a point about the expenses. You have internet expenses, gas and electric expenses that are within the space. You have maintenance expenses. If your floor, gets a bubble in it, if you need plumbing services, those are all added expenses that are not included in your rent cost. And so those are considered your overhead, right? We ended up adding a security system. You have your heating and air that you're paying for per month. So you want to add up all of those as your overhead and then say, okay, how many booth renters do I need that will cover the cost of that overhead and maybe even give you a little bit extra cash on top of what you're making from your clients.
So we made an amount.
Yeah, we got that break even amount where I was like, okay, let me just give you easy numbers to put in your head. So let's say your overhead total for the month to rent that space is $4,000. You need booth renters that pay $4,000 total in order to cover that or break even on the space. And then from there, if you want to add more, if you have space or capacity to add more, then anything above that $4,000 is extra money, passive income that comes to you, plus what you're making from your clients as a lash artist.
So what we did is we would make diagrams at both spaces. We were kind of narrowing down of how much we could make when it was 100% full versus 50% full. So like Christine mentioned, like we wanted to make sure, even if it was only 50% full, we still weren't paying negative amounts. So if it was $4,000 the lease, we wanted to make sure at 50% capacity. So with 4 girls, we were breaking even, versus if we had 8 girls and that was 100% full, we were, doubling our profit. But in addition to that, we kind of made for example, $500, we thought, with gas, electric, internet, and all those things, maintenance would be added to our monthly bill. Now, some months we wouldn't need any, maintenance or anything, and it'd roll over to the next month, but we just put it on there just so we had a budget.
And I think that those are all such good tips. Is there anything else that you guys want to wrap up this segment and this part of our series in this podcast with? And then we will wrap up and we will definitely continue with part 3. So Ty, any last?
I guess, yeah, my last words are, I'm sure this podcast was a lot more intense than the first one because It was more of our story with our first one. And it's a lot to do when you're opening up a space. But don't let that, I already said that, but don't let it stress you out because, as I've talked to people opening up salons and they just want me to brain dump and I tell them all these things, they just get so overwhelmed. But it wasn't like Ty and I walked in and it was like, oh my gosh, all these things we talked about today are due the next day. It was like, okay, as we tell the story, it was like one thing at a time we kind of knocked out. So don't think all of this is due the next day when you're opening up a space. Just know this is the journey you'll go on. And in addition to while you're lashing, this will kind of be like a second job for a while, is you'll be going and doing these things and, slowly tackling the list of opening up a salon.
I would add that asking questions is literally your best friend. So if you don't know something or something is foreign to you, like triple net, you're like, what is that? Ask somebody, Google it, use those resources that we're so lucky to have in the, 2022 to do things like that. Reach out on Instagram to other lash artists that own salons, find your network and build that. If you're passionate about it, that's amazing. If you want to open up a salon, if you're like, that seems like too much, I don't want to do that, that's totally cool too. It's always okay to just rent and have your business, your small business, and keep it there. And if you're happy there, that's awesome. But if you do have the passion for ownership and want to expand and have that stress, which also comes with fun rewards and fun challenges, then these are the things that worked for us, and you can kind of take some of those and run with them.
And as a side note and follow up to both of those comments, if you do want more help and you are looking for additional resources, AW does offer a course for those seeking salon ownership. It's a 6-week course with Alexis and myself, and we go through all of these things that we've been talking about, plus a lot more with the marketing and all of those kinds of things week by week, and really kind of gear the course to the students and their needs in the class. So if you do want to check that out and you are interested in that, go to awlashes.com, click on education, and you'll find the course there. So thank you so much, Alexis and Ty, for sharing all of your amazing knowledge today. Seriously, yeah. I mean, I know there's people like, they're probably a little bit freaking out. They're probably doing lashes and going, I am just staying where I'm at. I'm never doing it.
And that's okay. That's okay.
But I agree, for those that are, if this is a dream and it's even several years in the future, it can start to help you in that planning process so that you do have things in line, and so you don't feel overwhelmed when that time comes and you are making those decisions. So thank you both so much. It's been so much fun to talk to you guys, and we can't wait to have everybody else join us again for part 3.